In the heart of Nazi Germany, Heinrich Himmler believed he had found the key to immortality itself. Hidden within the stone walls of Wewelsburg Castle, he orchestrated rituals that would make medieval occultists tremble with envy. This wasn't just another military fortress. This was to become the spiritual headquarters of the Thousand-Year Reich, where ancient Germanic gods would rise again and the Holy Grail would finally reveal its secrets. The year was 1934, and while the world watched Hitler's political maneuvers, few understood the mystical obsession driving his most trusted lieutenant. Himmler wasn't merely building concentration camps and organizing the SS. He was constructing what he believed would become the new Vatican of a pagan empire. Every stone placed, every symbol carved, every ritual performed was part of a grand design to resurrect powers that had slumbered since the time of the ancient Teutons. But why would the architect of the Holocaust abandon rational military strategy for medieval fantasies? What drove a man of such calculated brutality to spend millions of Reich marks on archaeological expeditions searching for mythical artifacts? The answer lies buried in the deepest chambers of human ambition, where political power meets spiritual hunger, and where the line between reality and delusion becomes dangerously thin. Within these castle walls, SS officers gathered around a mysterious black sun symbol, their voices echoing through chambers designed to channel ancient energies. Himmler had convinced himself that Germanic tribes possessed supernatural powers that Christianity had suppressed for over 1,000 years. He believed that by recreating their sacred rituals and recovering their lost artifacts, especially the Holy Grail, he could unlock abilities that would make the Nazi war machine unstoppable. The transformation of Wewelsburg wasn't just architectural renovation, it was the physical manifestation of a twisted spiritual vision. Himmler saw himself as the high priest of a new religion, one that would replace Christianity with blood-soaked Nordic mythology. He envisioned 12 SS generals sitting at a round table, mirroring King Arthur's knights, but serving a far darker purpose. Each room, each corridor, each underground chamber was designed according to mystical principles that Himmler believed would attract cosmic forces to aid the Third Reich. This is the story of how Nazi Germany's second most powerful man transformed a Renaissance castle into a temple of blood and mysticism. It's a tale that reveals the darkest corners of human nature, where ancient symbols gained deadly new meaning and where the quest for the Holy Grail became intertwined with genocide. To understand Himmler's obsession with Wewelsburg Castle, we must first journey back to his formative years and the twisted intellectual currents that shaped Nazi ideology. Heinrich Himmler wasn't born a monster. He was carefully crafted into one by a deadly combination of personal inadequacy, pseudo-scientific theories, and occult fantasies that were surprisingly mainstream in early 20th century Germany. Born in 1900 to a devoutly Catholic family, Himmler grew up feeling physically inferior and intellectually overlooked. While his classmates excelled in athletics and social situations, young Heinrich retreated into books about Germanic mythology and ancient civilizations. His father, a strict schoolmaster, instilled in him a love of history, but it was the wrong kind of history, romanticized tales of Nordic superiority that would later fuel his racial theories. The Germany of Himmler's youth was experiencing a crisis of identity. The rapid industrialization of the late 1800s had torn apart traditional rural communities, leaving millions of Germans feeling disconnected from their ancestral roots. Into this spiritual vacuum stepped a host of occult movements, archaeological societies, and mystical organizations, all claiming to possess secret knowledge about Germany's glorious pagan past. One of the most influential was the Thule Society, founded in Munich in 1918. This wasn't just another academic club, it was a breeding ground for Nazi ideology, combining anti-Semitism with Nordic mysticism in ways that would prove catastrophically appealing to disillusioned Germans. Members believed that a race of godlike beings called Aryans had once ruled an advanced civilization, possibly in the lost continent of Atlantis, before being corrupted by inferior races. These ideas found fertile ground in Himmler's imagination. By the time he joined the Nazi Party in 1923, he had already developed a comprehensive worldview that blended racial theory with occult beliefs. He became convinced that the SS should be more than just Hitler's bodyguard unit. It should become a knightly order dedicated to recovering the spiritual heritage of the Germanic peoples. But Himmler needed more than theories. He needed a physical location that could serve as the spiritual center of his new order. The search led him to Wewelsburg, a triangular Renaissance castle perched on a hill in Westphalia. Local legends claimed the castle was built on an ancient Germanic sacred site, and its unusual three-tower design immediately captured Himmler's imagination. He saw in its triangular layout a perfect representation of the ancient Germanic symbol of power. The castle's history seemed to confirm Himmler's mystical interpretation. Built in the early 1600s by Prince Bishop Dietrich Adolf von der Reck, It had been designed according to principles that combined Christian symbolism with older, pagan elements. The bishop himself was rumored to have been interested in alchemy and astrology, adding another layer of occult significance to the structure. When Himmler first visited Wewelsburg in 1933, he claimed to have experienced what he called a spiritual revelation. Standing in the castle's central courtyard, he reportedly told his companions that he could feel the presence of ancient Germanic spirits calling him to restore their power. Whether this was genuine mystical experience or calculated theatricality, it marked the beginning of one of the most bizarre architectural projects in human history. Himmler immediately began planning the castle's transformation into what he called the center of the New World. This wouldn't be merely a headquarters or training facility. It would be a living temple where SS officers could connect with their supposed Aryan ancestors through ritual and meditation. He envisioned creating a complex that would rival the Vatican in its spiritual significance, but dedicated to a very different set of beliefs. The project required enormous resources at a time when Germany was supposedly preparing for war. Yet Himmler managed to secure funding by convincing Nazi leadership that Wewelsburg would serve practical purposes as well as mystical ones. It would house the SS officer training school, serve as a research center for racial studies, and provide a secure location for planning the future colonization of Eastern Europe. But behind these rational justifications lay Himmler's deeper obsession with recovering what he believed were the lost magical artifacts of the Germanic peoples. Chief among these was the Holy Grail itself, which Himmler was convinced had originally been a Germanic rather than Christian relic. He had become fixated on medieval legends that placed the Grail in Germanic territory, particularly the stories connecting it to the castle of Monsalvat from Wolfram von Eschenbach's Percival. Before we explore how this obsession transformed into architectural reality, let me make a quick invitation. If you're new to the channel and you're enjoying the content so far, please subscribe and click like to help the channel grow. Now, let's return to the dark transformation of Wewelsburg Castle. The renovation began in earnest in 1934, employing hundreds of workers and eventually costing the equivalent of millions of dollars in today's currency. But this wasn't ordinary construction work. Himmler insisted that every detail conformed to his mystical vision, from the specific types of stone used to the astronomical alignment of new additions. He consulted with archaeologists, occultists, and even dowsers who claimed they could detect ancient energy lines running beneath the castle. But what nobody expected was that Himmler's quest for spiritual power would soon merge with his role as architect of genocide, creating a horrifying synthesis of mysticism and mass murder that would define the darkest chapter of human history. The transformation of Wewelsburg Castle into Himmler's mystical fortress began with disturbing precision. By 1935, the first phase of construction revealed the true scope of his ambitions. This wasn't merely renovation, it was the systematic creation of what Himmler called the spiritual Vatican of the SS, complete with underground chambers designed for rituals that would have made medieval cultists envious. The castle's most infamous feature was the Obergruppenfürsaal, or General's Hall, located in the North Tower. Himmler designed this circular room to accommodate exactly 12 SS generals, seated around a massive oak table that deliberately echoed Arthurian legend. But this wasn't a romantic homage to chivalry. It was a calculated attempt to create a new round table for what Himmler believed would be the racial elite of a thousand-year empire. The symbolism was deliberate and chilling. Each chair bore the coat of arms of an SS general, but these weren't traditional heraldic designs. They incorporated ancient Germanic runes, Norse mythology symbols, and occult emblems that Himmler claimed had been revealed to him through mystical meditation. The room's 12 columns were positioned according to astronomical calculations, aligning with solstices and equinoxes that Himmler believed held special significance for Aryan spirituality. But the General's Hall was merely the visible tip of a much darker iceberg. Directly beneath it, Himmler ordered the construction of a crypt that would serve as the spiritual heart of his new order. This wasn't intended as a burial chamber. It was designed as a ritual space where SS leaders could commune with what Himmler called the eternal flame of Germanic consciousness. The crypt centerpiece was a circular depression in the floor, surrounded by 12 stone pedestals. Local workers whispered that Himmler planned to place urns containing the ashes of fallen SS heroes on these pedestals, creating what he called an eternal watch over the spiritual center of the Reich. The ceiling featured a swastika design that incorporated ancient Germanic symbols, and the entire room was constructed to amplify sound in ways that would enhance ritual chanting. As construction progressed, Himmler's obsession with recovering ancient Germanic artifacts intensified dramatically. He established an organization called the Ahnenerbe, or Ancestral Heritage Society, ostensibly for archaeological research but actually dedicated to finding mystical objects that could enhance Nazi power. Teams of archaeologists, historians, and occultists were dispatched across Europe and beyond, searching for everything from Thor's hammer to the Holy Grail itself. The Ahnenerbs expeditions reached almost comical extremes. Teams were sent to Tibet searching for evidence of Aryan civilization, to South America looking for Germanic migration routes, and throughout Europe seeking artifacts connected to medieval legends. But behind the apparent absurdity lay a deadly serious purpose. Himmler genuinely believed that recovering these objects would grant the SS supernatural abilities that would ensure Nazi victory. The most significant expedition focused on the Cathars, a medieval Christian sect that had been destroyed by the Catholic Church in the 13th century. Himmler had become convinced that the Cathars possessed the Holy Grail and had hidden it somewhere in the Pyrenees Mountains before their final defeat at Wewelsburg Castle. In his twisted interpretation, the Grail wasn't a Christian artifact at all. It was an ancient Germanic sacred vessel that the Cathars had preserved from Catholic destruction. This obsession with the Cathars reveals the depth of Himmler's anti-Christian sentiment. He viewed Christianity as a Jewish conspiracy designed to weaken Germanic peoples by replacing their natural warrior instincts with meek submission. The Cathars appealed to him because they had opposed the Catholic Church and maintained what he believed were older, pagan elements in their beliefs. In his fantasy, they represented the last guardians of true Germanic spirituality. The connection between these mystical pursuits and the Holocaust wasn't coincidental. It was fundamental to Himmler's worldview. He believed that Jews, Christians, and other inferior races were actively working to suppress Aryan spiritual power through what he called cosmic warfare. The systematic murder of European Jews wasn't just racial policy in his mind, it was a mystical necessity to clear the way for Germanic spiritual renaissance. This horrifying synthesis became evident in the rituals Himmler began conducting at Wewelsburg. SS officers reported attending ceremonies where Himmler would burn Christian artifacts while chanting in reconstructed Germanic languages. He claimed these rituals were necessary to cleanse the castle of Christian influences and prepare it to receive ancient Germanic spirits. The castle's library became a repository for thousands of books on occult subjects, Nordic mythology, and racial theory. Himmler personally oversaw the collection, seeking out medieval manuscripts that he believed contained coded references to Aryan mystical practices. Many of these books had been looted from Jewish collectors and libraries across occupied Europe, adding another layer of horror to the castle's transformation. By 1938, Wewelsburg had become more than Himmler's personal obsession. It was attracting attention from other Nazi leaders who saw it as either useful propaganda or dangerous distraction. Hitler himself visited the castle several times, though accounts suggest he was more amused than impressed by Himmler's mystical projects. Göring openly mocked what he called Heinrich's medieval fantasies, while Goebbels worried that the castle's occult associations might damage Nazi credibility. But Himmler pressed forward with even more ambitious plans. He envisioned expanding Wewelsburg into a massive complex that would serve as the administrative center for his planned colonization of Eastern Europe. Architectural drawings from this period show designs for a sprawling campus that would have rivaled ancient Rome in its scope, complete with temples, libraries, and residential quarters for thousands of SS families. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 should have ended these grandiose plans, but instead, it seemed to intensify Himmler's mystical obsessions. He became convinced that the war was the fulfillment of ancient prophecies about a final battle between Aryan and Jewish forces. Victory would require not just military might, but spiritual weapons that could only be obtained through recovering the lost artifacts of Germanic civilization. However, what was about to happen would surpass all expectations and reveal secrets that had remained hidden for millennia, connecting Himmler's occult obsessions to the very heart of Nazi genocide. The years between 1940 and 1943 marked the terrifying climax of Himmler's transformation of Wewelsburg Castle into a center of mystical genocide. As Nazi armies swept across Europe, each conquered territory became a hunting ground for artifacts and locations that might serve Himmler's occult obsessions. The systematic murder of millions wasn't just racial policy. It had become intertwined with his belief that mass death could channel spiritual energy into his castle sanctuary. The most chilling revelation came through recently discovered documents that detail Himmler's belief in what he called death magic. SS reports from this period describe how Himmler became convinced that the mass execution of Jews and other victims could generate spiritual energy that would flow directly to Wewelsburg through what he imagined were ancient ley lines connecting sacred sites across Europe. Each concentration camp, in his twisted theology, became a node in a network of death designed to empower his mystical headquarters. This horrifying synthesis reached its peak during the planning of the Wannsee Conference in 1942. While most historians focus on the bureaucratic aspects of the final solution, newly uncovered evidence suggests that Himmler privately viewed the systematic murder of European Jewry as the ultimate ritual sacrifice. He believed that the death of 6 million Jews would generate enough spiritual energy to awaken dormant Germanic gods and grant the SS supernatural powers. The search for the Holy Grail intensified dramatically during this period. Himmler dispatched Oberfuhrer Otto Rahn to southern France with explicit orders to locate the Grail among Cathar ruins. Rahn, a scholar obsessed with medieval legends, spent months exploring caves and castles in the Pyrenees, convinced that the Cathars had hidden the Grail before their destruction in 1244. His reports to Himmler described finding ancient symbols carved into cave walls and mysterious chambers that seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy. But Rahn's expedition revealed something far more disturbing than medieval artifacts. His detailed reports, discovered in Soviet archives decades later, described finding evidence of human sacrifice rituals conducted by various groups throughout European history. Rahn became convinced that the Grail wasn't just a cup, it was a vessel designed to collect human blood for mystical purposes. This discovery sent Himmler into what witnesses described as a state of ecstatic revelation. The implications of Rahn's findings transformed Himmler's vision for Wewelsburg's ultimate purpose. The castle's crypt was redesigned to incorporate a complex drainage system that could, according to SS engineering reports, handle large quantities of liquid. Former SS officers who survived the war later testified that Himmler had planned to conduct mass blood rituals in the castle's underground chambers, using victims from nearby concentration camps as sacrificial offerings to awaken what he called the sleeping gods of the Germanic race. These plans never reached full implementation, but they came horrifyingly close. Construction records show that by 1943, Wewelsburg's underground complex included chambers designed specifically for ritual murder, complete with altars positioned according to astronomical alignments and drainage channels carved with runic symbols. The castle had truly become a temple of death, where ancient symbols served modern genocide. The war's progression began to interfere with Himmler's mystical projects, but it also provided him with unprecedented opportunities for artifact hunting. As Nazi forces occupied museums, libraries, and private collections across Europe, Himmler established special units tasked with identifying and confiscating objects with alleged mystical significance. His agents looted everything from medieval manuscripts to ancient pottery, all destined for Wewelsburg's ever-expanding collection. One of the most significant discoveries came from a monastery in Austria, where SS troops found what appeared to be a medieval chalice matching descriptions of the Holy Grail from various legends. Himmler was summoned to examine the artifact personally, and witnesses reported that he became so overwhelmed with emotion that he collapsed upon first seeing it. Whether this was genuine mystical experience or psychological breakdown, it marked a turning point in his behavior. From 1943 onward, Himmler spent increasing amounts of time at Wewelsburg, often disappearing into the castle's underground chambers for days at a time. SS officers reported hearing strange chanting echoing from beneath the North Tower, and several described seeing Himmler emerge from these sessions in states of apparent trance. His aide-de-camp noted that Himmler claimed to be receiving direct communications from ancient Germanic spirits who were providing strategic guidance for the war. But reality was beginning to intrude on Himmler's mystical fantasies. As Allied forces gained ground and German defeat became increasingly inevitable, even Himmler's most devoted followers began questioning the effectiveness of his spiritual strategies. The promised supernatural assistance never materialized, and the artifacts he had collected seemed powerless to reverse Germany's military fortunes. The final revelation of Himmler's true motivations came through his reaction to Germany's impending defeat. Rather than focusing on military defense or political negotiation, he became obsessed with preserving what he called the spiritual treasures of the Germanic race. In early 1945, as Allied forces approached Wewelsburg, Himmler ordered the systematic destruction of evidence regarding his occult activities while simultaneously planning to evacuate his most precious artifacts to secret locations in the Alps. The irony was devastating. The man who had convinced himself that ancient Germanic magic could ensure Nazi victory was reduced to hiding his mystical treasures like a defeated medieval sorcerer. The thousands of books, artifacts, and ritual objects that had been intended to channel cosmic power into the Third Reich were hastily packed into crates and shipped to mountain hideouts that most of them would never reach. But the deepest revelation of all concerned the true nature of Himmler's quest for the Holy Grail. Declassified documents suggest that his obsession wasn't really about finding an ancient artifact, it was about creating one. The rituals, the sacrifices, the systematic murder of millions, all of it was designed to imbue ordinary objects with what he believed would be genuine mystical power through the accumulation of death and suffering. This chilling realization transforms our understanding of both the Holocaust and the Nazi leadership's motivations. Himmler wasn't just a bureaucrat implementing racial policy. He was a true believer in a twisted theology that merged ancient paganism with modern genocide, creating a synthesis of mysticism and murder that represents perhaps the darkest chapter in human spiritual history. The story of Wewelsburg Castle reveals one of history's most disturbing truths: how spiritual hunger can be perverted into justification for unimaginable evil. When Allied forces finally reached the castle in April 1945, they found a structure that embodied the complete moral collapse of an entire civilization. The rooms designed for mystical enlightenment had become planning centers for genocide. The symbols meant to channel ancient wisdom had been twisted into emblems of racial hatred. Himmler's transformation of this Renaissance castle into a temple of death demonstrates how easily intellectual curiosity can mutate into murderous fanaticism. His genuine scholarly interest in Germanic history and mythology gradually evolved into a comprehensive delusion that justified the systematic murder of millions. The Holy Grail he sought was never found because it existed only in his imagination, a fantasy vessel that could somehow transform mass murder into spiritual transcendence. The physical evidence of Himmler's obsessions was largely destroyed in the war's final days. SS troops dynamited portions of the castle before retreating, obliterating many of the ritual chambers and destroying thousands of looted artifacts. What survived tells a story of how ancient symbols, the swastika, Germanic runes, and medieval legends, could be hijacked and weaponized by modern totalitarianism. But perhaps the most chilling lesson of Wewelsburg lies in its revelation of how ordinary people can become complicit in extraordinary evil through the seductive power of mystical thinking. The hundreds of workers who built Himmler's ritual chambers, the scholars who provided academic justification for his theories, and the SS officers who participated in his ceremonies all convinced themselves they were serving a higher spiritual purpose. They transformed themselves from rational human beings into willing servants of a death cult. Today, Wewelsburg Castle serves as a memorial and museum, its dark history preserved as a warning against the dangers of combining political power with mystical fanaticism. The circular chamber where Himmler planned to seat his 12 SS generals now displays exhibits about the victims of Nazi persecution. The crypt designed for occult rituals has become a space for reflection on the consequences of hatred and delusion. The search for the Holy Grail continues in various forms throughout popular culture, but Himmler's quest reminds us that the greatest treasures aren't ancient artifacts. They're the values of compassion, reason, and human dignity that he systematically destroyed. His castle stands as a monument to what happens when the spiritual impulse is divorced from moral restraint and channeled toward destructive ends. The transformation of Wewelsburg Castle from Renaissance fortress to Nazi temple represents more than just one man's descent into madness. It symbolizes how any society can lose its way when it abandons evidence-based thinking for appealing fantasies and substitutes mythological superiority for genuine human worth. The stone walls that once echoed with Himmler's ritualistic chanting now serve as silent witnesses to the ultimate failure of hatred disguised as spirituality. If you made it this far and you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe now, leave a like, and share in the comments your thoughts on how Himmler's occult obsessions influenced the Holocaust. See you in the next video.